Hello and welcome back. In my last lecture, I talked about archaeology, oral culture, and linguistics, and what they have to do with the world described in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the psychology of the Mycenaean Greek, and I'd also like to talk about the world in which Homer actually lived, that is, the Archaic Age, which came a bit later. So let's get right into it. Here's the Bronze Age Greece that Homer describes in his Iliad and his Odyssey. We can see that it more or less corresponds to modern Greece on the map, with the exception of the fact that Western Turkey here is all Greek, with the exception of these Hittite settlements such as Troy. And we even see a couple of names that are recognizable. Here we see Athens. However, a lot of the towns that are on this map would later disappear. When we think about the Bronze Age, some of the concepts that will help us when we're thinking about times that are even later to come are already there. And that is the difference between a guilt culture and a shame culture is pretty important for the understanding of the Greek mind during the classical period. Guilt culture is the kind of culture in which we live, where your self-worth is not attached to the outside, but rather how you see your actions squaring up with your reality or your morality. For example, I feel guilty because I stole that car and I know it was wrong. This is the example of a thought process of someone who lives in a guilt culture. The Greeks didn't live in a guilt culture. The Mycenaean Greeks and the Greeks who came after them lived in what's called a shame culture. And a shame culture is one in which your self-worth is defined by others. So if you mess up, you feel bad because others know about it or they may know about it. So I feel ashamed because people in my neighborhood know that I stole that car. This is a shame culture reaction to, this is something to think about as we're reading Homer's Odyssey, and this is also something to think about when we think about the actions of leaders and people in the times to come, archaic and classical ages as well. Now, let's talk about some key terms from the Bronze Age and terms that will carry us all the way down to the classical era as well. The first of these is time. Time is your reputation or buzz. This is what people are saying about you right now. Sometimes this word gets defined as honor, and that's valid too. So another concept is eidos, and this is a sense of shame or obligation. And the society we're reading about functions on shame, because it's a shame culture. So your sense of being ashamed of bad things, or your sense of fear of feeling shame, is your eidos. The people at the top of the social structure in the society are the basileia. The basileos is the singular of that. And characters in Homer like Achilles, Odysseus, or Nestor are basileia. They are chiefs or kings. Now, when I say chiefs or kings, don't imagine the king of a place like England or the king of a place like France. Instead, imagine someone who's the chief or king of a place that's more of the size of a county inside of the state of Maryland. The person who might be in charge of these kings or chiefs is the wanax. And this is a chief of chiefs or a king of kings who rules over them all. In the works of Homer, we see that there's a loose coalition of Greek chieftains ruled over by a warlord called Agamemnon. And Agamemnon doesn't necessarily have outright political control of the territories of the kings below him, but he does have some influence over them because he's richer than they are. Men who are in this social stratum are not only obsessed with their time, but also their kleos. And their kleos is their fame or undying glory. It's what people say about you long after you're dead. If you have a good honor, if you have a good time, people are saying good things about you, you'll get your kleos, and people will be talking about you long after you're gone. Well, how do you get your kleos? How do you have good time? Well, you possess arete, of course. And this is excellence. This is a quality of personal excellence. And you can gain this by word or deed, and by that I mean you can talk people into doing something important. That's a way of showing your arete. You can also do something great, especially on the battlefield. But it's better to show your arete by doing something great on the battlefield. If you do possess arete, and if you are a basileos or a wanax, you're the best. You're an aristos. And these are the ones who are in control. And this is where we get our term aristocracy, the Greek concept of aristokratia. This is rule by the best. Rule by the best. And we'll see later on that in archaic Greece, the concept of power transferring from one class to another is pretty logical here. We have kings ruling at first, and then we move into a situation where the aristocrats rule in place of the kings before we move into an oligarchy, which is where we are in pre-classical Athens. Finally, there's the concept of dike. And dike is justice or honor, and it's what's right, even if to us it's not necessarily what is fair. For example, a king like Odysseus can ask his people to do things that he would never do, and it's right, it's just, because he is king, and they are not king. So that's how justice works back then. Some other terms to think about for the Bronze Age going into the Archaic Age are the ones that I've just mentioned. People who are in charge, the aristos, are referred to as a class as the aristoi. The aristoi. They possess their arete, they have good time, and they hope to gain their kleos. And in Homer's Odyssey, you see that the basic unit of human existence in the Greek world is the oikos. And the oikos is the Greek word for house, but here it refers to something broader. It's the economic, self-sufficient unit based on agriculture and livestock. And it's also a political entity because the head of the oikos is in charge. So a king like Odysseus would be the king, the basileos, of his own oikos. Household joins with another household to form a genos or clan, and house of Agamemnon and Mycenae represents just as a clan. And we'll find indeed that Odysseus has clan or family connections with other kings in his region. What kind of palace would these kings have lived in? One like this here in Knossos in Crete. And from this overhead shot, you can see that there's this kind of labyrinthine maze of little chambers, right? But the palace complex you're seeing here is quite large. It occupies over 100,000 square feet, and the architecture inside would have looked something like this. Many of the large palace complexes, like the ones I just showed you, ruled or inhabited by basileia, like Odysseus, were abandoned or destroyed at the end of the Dark Age. And they weren't rebuilt. Why did this happen? I'll be the first to tell you that I'm not really sure. There are all kinds of theories about this involving an invasion by a group of people identified as the Sea People by the Egyptians and other groups, the Hittites especially. But who are the Sea People? It's quite likely that the Sea People themselves are Bronze Age Greeks. So it doesn't really explain why they would have destroyed their own palaces. Other theories involve tidal waves or earthquakes or volcanic eruptions. None of these really account for the total collapse of the palace culture that you see in the Mycenaean Bronze Age fully. It's probably some combination of things. We may never have a surefire answer for this. What we do know is that 1200 or shortly after 1200, things start falling apart. These palaces burn down or broken up in some way and are destroyed and never rebuilt. The archaeological record for this period indicates little trade and no evidence of writing at all. So Mycenaean Linear B script falls out of use. However, after many, many generations, Greek culture will go through some changes, and there will be an uptick in trade and in other things in the Archaic Age in ancient Greece. See you then.